A young nurse is hired to change the diapers of a millionaire's son, who is in a vegetative state. Everyone laughed at her, but a year later, they were horrified by what happened. The imposing iron gates of the Harrison mansion slowly opened. As Sarah Matthews drove her modest sedan up the winding driveway, the autumn leaves scattered across the perfectly manicured lawn, creating a picturesque scene that belied the tension building in her chest. At 28, with 7 years of nursing experience under her belt, Sarah had handled countless challenging cases, but something about this one felt different. The job offer had come unexpectedly, a private nursing position with compensation. That exceeded anything she'd ever imagined. The catch: she would be caring for Alexander Harrison Jr., the 20-year-old son of one of the country's most prominent business magnates, who had been in a vegetative state for the past 18 months. As Sarah parked her car, she caught sight of her reflection in the rearview mirror and straightened her navy blue blazer. Her honey-brown hair was neatly tied back, and her green eyes reflected a determination that had become her trademark in the medical field. She had researched everything she could about the case, but information was scarce, protected by the family's privacy and influence. The massive wooden doors opened before she could reach for the doorbell, revealing Mrs. Victoria Harrison, Alexander's stepmother. The woman's perfectly coiffed silver blonde hair and designer outfit exuded an air of sophistication that made Sarah instantly conscious of her own simple attire. "Ms. Matthews, I presume." Victoria's voice was as cold as her steel grey eyes. "You're 3 minutes early, please follow me." The interior of the mansion was a study in opulence, with soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that probably cost more than Sarah's entire apartment building. Their footsteps echoed on the marble floors as Victoria led her through a maze of corridors, offering no conversation beyond necessary directions. Finally, they reached a large study where Richard Harrison, Alexander's father, stood gazing out a floor-to-ceiling window. At 50, he cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit, but Sarah immediately noticed the weariness in his shoulders and the grey threading through his dark hair. "Mr. Harrison," Sarah stepped forward, extending her hand. "Thank you for this opportunity." Richard turned, his handshake firm but brief. "Miss Matthews, your references are impressive, particularly your work with coma patients at St. Mary's. However, I need to be clear. This position requires absolute discretion and dedication." "Of course, sir. I understand completely." Victoria interjected, her voice sharp. "What my husband means is that we've had difficulties with previous nurses. They either couldn't handle the demands of the position or became too emotionally involved." Sarah met Victoria's gaze steadily. "I assure you, I'm professionally trained to maintain appropriate boundaries while providing the highest level of care." "Yes, well," Victoria's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "We'll see about that. Alexander's condition requires round-the-clock attention. You'll be provided with living quarters in the East Wing near his suite. I've prepared a detailed schedule of his care requirements." Richard moved to his desk, picking up a thick folder. "Before we proceed, there's the matter of the non-disclosure agreement. Our legal team has prepared—" A sudden crash from upstairs interrupted him, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Victoria's face tightened with annoyance. "That would be Maria, Alexander's current nurse. She's leaving us today." Sarah watched as a middle-aged woman burst into the study, her uniform rumpled and her face streaked with tears. "I can't do this anymore. He needs more than just lying there like a vegetable. He needs real help, real therapy, not just basic care and diaper changes." Victoria stepped forward, her voice razor-sharp. "Maria, you're making a scene. We've already discussed this." "No, you discussed it. You decided." Maria turned to Richard, her voice pleading. "Mr. Harrison, please, if you'd just consider alternative therapies." "That's enough," Victoria cut her off. "Security will escort you out." As Maria was led away, Sarah noticed Richard's hands trembling slightly as he set down the folder. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the distant ticking of an antique clock. "Well," Victoria smoothed her already perfect hair, "that was unfortunate. Now, Miss Matthews, Shall we discuss your duties? Sarah nodded, but her mind was racing. What had Maria meant about alternative therapies? Why had she been so upset? The mansion suddenly felt colder, its grandeur taking on an almost oppressive quality. First, Victoria continued, you should know that we maintain strict protocols regarding Alexander's care. Any deviation from these protocols will result in immediate termination. Is that clear? Yes, Mrs. Harrison. Sarah's response was professional, but inside her determination was growing. Something wasn't right here, and she intended to find out what it was. The door to Alexander's suite opened silently, revealing a room that looked more like a high-end hospital ward than a young man's bedroom. The space was immaculately clean, with medical equipment arranged precisely around a specialized bed. Large windows offered a view of the estate's sprawling gardens, but heavy curtains filtered the sunlight to a dim glow. Sarah's heart clenched as she saw Alexander for the first time. He lay motionless, his tall frame seeming smaller somehow against the white sheets. His dark hair had been recently trimmed, his face clean-shaven, clear signs of attentive basics, care. But there was something missing, something that went beyond the obvious tragedy of his condition. Alexander's vital signs are monitored constantly, Victoria explained, gesturing to the equipment. The data is transmitted directly to his medical team. You'll receive daily instructions from Dr. Peterson, our chief physician. Sarah moved closer to the bed, her trained eye taking in details. Alexander's skin was pale but healthy, his muscles showing minimal atrophy, unusual for someone who had been immobile for so long. Has he been receiving physical therapy? Basic range of motion exercises, Victoria replied dismissively. Dr. Peterson believes anything more would be unnecessarily taxing. Sarah frowned slightly. But research shows that aggressive physical therapy can help prevent complications and potentially stimulate. Ms. Matthews, Victoria interrupted, her tone sharp. We've consulted with the finest neurologists in the country. They all agree that Alexander's condition is unlikely to improve. Our focus is on maintaining his current state and ensuring his comfort. Before Sarah could respond, a soft meow caught her attention. A grey cat had slipped into the room and was now trying to jump onto Alexander's bed. Victoria moved quickly to shoo it away. That's Winston, she explained with obvious disapproval. He was Alexander's pet. We've tried to keep him out of this room, but he's rather persistent. Please ensure the door remains closed at all times. Sarah watched the cat retreat, noting how it lingered in the doorway, its yellow eyes fixed on Alexander. Something about the animal's devotion touched her deeply. Now, Victoria continued, here's the daily schedule. Medications are administered at strict intervals. Bathing and changes occur 3 times daily. Meals are delivered via feeding tube, according to the nutritionist's specifications. Any questions? Sarah had dozens, but she chose her words carefully. I noticed some music therapy equipment in the corner. Has that been tried? A shadow crossed Victoria's face. A brief experiment. Dr. Peterson deemed it ineffective. I see. Sarah made a mental note to investigate further. And visitors? Does Alexander have friends who come to see him? That's not relevant to your duties, Victoria replied coldly. Your focus should be on maintaining his physical well-being, nothing more. As if on cue, Richard appeared in the doorway. He approached his son's bed slowly, his expression unreadable. For a moment he stood there looking down at Alexander's still form. Then, without a word, he reached out and adjusted the blanket slightly, his hands lingering for just a second too long. I have meetings for the rest of the day, he announced, his business persona sliding back into place. Ms. Matthews, the staff will show you to your quarters. You'll begin your duties tomorrow morning. After they left, Sarah remained in the room studying her new patient. Despite his unconscious state, there was something compelling about Alexander's face, a suggestion of the vibrant young man he must have been. On his bedside table, a single photograph caught her eye. A younger Alexander on horseback, his face split in a wide grin, trophy in hand. Winston the cat had crept back into the room and was now sitting at her feet, looking up expectantly. Sarah knelt down to scratch behind his ears. Well, Winston, she whispered. What's really going? on in this house? And why do I get the feeling that everyone's given up except you?" The cat purred in response, and Sarah felt her resolve strengthen. Something about this case wasn't adding up. The state-of-the-art equipment combined with minimal therapy, the family's resistance to alternative treatments, the emotional outburst from the previous nurse, it all pointed to a deeper story. As she stood to leave, Sarah noticed something else. A small notebook partially hidden behind medical supplies on the bedside table. It looked old, well used, its corners worn smooth. She reached for it, but footsteps in the hallway made her pause. A member of the household staff appeared to show her to her quarters. Walking away from Alexander's room, Sarah's mind was already formulating plans. Tomorrow, she would begin her own assessment, regardless of the strict protocols. Because if there was even a chance of reaching Alexander, of bringing him back, she had to try. The question was, how much resistance would she face? And what secrets was this family so determined to keep buried? Sarah's first week at the Harrison mansion had been a careful dance of observation and compliance. On the surface, she followed Victoria's rigid protocols, but her trained eye caught details that others might have missed. The way Alexander's fingers sometimes twitched when Winston purred nearby, the slight change in his breathing pattern when classical music played in the distance, small signs that suggested more awareness than his charts indicated. One quiet afternoon, while performing her routine checks, Sarah discovered the notebook she'd noticed earlier had fallen behind the bedside table. Making sure she was alone, she retrieved it, her heart racing as she opened to the first page. The handwriting was bold and energetic, so different from Alexander's current state. April 15th, she read silently. Dad's at it again with his legacy talks. Harrison Industries this, Harrison Industries that. Sometimes I wonder if he sees me as a son or just his succession plan. At least the stables give me peace. Thunder understands me better than any human. The sound of heels clicking on marble made Sarah quickly hide the notebook in her uniform pocket. Victoria appeared in the doorway, accompanied by a tall man in an expensive suit. "Ms. Matthews, this is James Sterling, my brother, and the family's attorney," Victoria announced. "He'll be overseeing some changes to Alexander's care protocols." James Sterling's smile didn't reach his eyes as he shook Sarah's hand. "I've heard good things about your work this past week, though I understand you've made some suggestions about alternative treatments." Sarah maintained her professional composure. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Recent studies show promising results with sensory stimulation and intensive physical therapy in cases similar to Alexander's." "Ah, yes." Sterling's tone was condescending. "However, as Alexander's legal guardian, I must prioritize treatments with proven track records. We wouldn't want to give the family false hope, would we?" "Legal guardian?" Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. "I thought Mr. Harrison—" "It's a temporary arrangement," Victoria interjected quickly. "Given Richard's emotional involvement, we felt it best to have someone more objective managing Alexander's care decisions." Sarah noticed how Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she spoke, despite her controlled expression. Something about this arrangement clearly troubled her, despite her apparent agreement with it. Later that evening, Sarah was organizing Alexander's medical supplies when she heard hushed voices from the hallway. She recognized Richard Harrison's distinctive tone, now sharp with anger. "This isn't what we agreed to, James. You're overstepping." "Richard, be reasonable." Sterling's voice was smooth as silk. "Your judgment is compromised when it comes to Alexander. These experimental treatments you're considering, they're expensive and unreliable. As his guardian, I have to protect his interests." "His interests or yours?" Richard's voice cracked with emotion. "Ever since that day—" "We agreed never to discuss that." Victoria's voice joined the conversation, urgent and fearful. "Please, Richard, James knows what's best." Sarah held her breath, straining to hear more, but the voices moved away. She looked at Alexander's still form, questions multiplying in her mind. What had happened on that day? Why would a successful businessman like Richard Harrison give up control of his son's care? A soft touch against her ankle made her jump. Winston had appeared silently, as he often did during her evening shifts. The cat leaped gracefully onto Alexander's bed, settling into his usual spot near the young man's hand. Sarah noticed something. She hadn't before. Alexander's heart rate monitor showed a subtle but distinct change when Winston made contact. Making sure she was alone, Sarah pulled out her phone and began documenting the reading. She also retrieved the notebook, quickly photographing several pages before returning it to its hiding place. If she was going to help Alexander, she needed to understand what had happened to him. And somewhere in this maze of family politics and hidden agendas, she felt certain there were answers. That night in her quarters, Sarah reviewed her notes from the past week. The official accident report mentioned a fall at the family's country estate, but details were mysteriously vague. She began a list: Alexander's unexpected responsiveness to sensory stimulation, the legal guardianship transfer, the family's resistance to new treatments, the hidden journal. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. To her surprise, she found one of the older housekeepers, Eleanor, standing there with a troubled expression. "Miss Matthews," Elena whispered, glancing nervously down the hallway. "There's something you should know about the young master's accident, something I saw that day." Elena's revelation weighed heavily on Sarah's mind as she began her morning routine the next day. The housekeeper's words had painted a very different picture of the events leading up to Alexander's accident, one that involved a heated argument between Richard and Victoria, mysterious phone calls, and Alexander's increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks before the incident. "He wasn't himself," Eleanor had explained, her weathered hands twisting her apron. "Always checking his phone, staying out late at the stables. The night before, I heard him arguing with someone on the phone about documents, something about the company." Sarah moved through Alexander's room with practiced efficiency, her mind racing. According to his vital signs, he'd had a restless night, unusual for someone in his condition. As she adjusted his pillows, she noticed something that made her pause: a small scar at the base of his scalp, different from the injury marks documented in his medical files. "Good morning, Alexander," she said softly, maintaining her habit of speaking to him as if he could respond. "I brought something special today. Your father mentioned you used to play piano, so I thought—" She pulled out her tablet and placed it nearby, starting a classical piano piece, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Victoria had forbidden music therapy, but Sarah had noticed Alexander's subtle responses to background music during her care routines. "Miss Matthews," James Sterling's voice from the doorway made her jump. "I don't recall approving music as part of Alexander's treatment plan." Sarah turned to face him, maintaining her professional demeanor. "Mr. Sterling, music therapy has been shown to stimulate brain activity in patients with similar conditions. I was just overstepping your authority," he completed smoothly, moving into the room. His expensive suit seemed out of place among the medical equipment. "I've been reviewing your activities this past week. You seem to have difficulty following established protocols." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Richard Harrison burst in, looking agitated, with Victoria close behind. "James, we need to talk," Richard demanded. "The board meeting. They're questioning Alexander's trust fund management." Sterling's face hardened. "This isn't the time or place, Richard. Perhaps we should discuss this in my office." "No," Richard's voice rose. "No more closed-door meetings. I want answers about where the rehabilitation funds have been going, the investments you recommended." "Richard, please," Victoria interceded, placing a hand on her husband's arm. "You're upsetting Alexander." His readings. Indeed, the monitors showed increased activity. Sarah watched the numbers climb, her medical training kicking in. But something else caught her attention. Alexander's right hand had twitched, his fingers curling slightly. "Mr. Harrison," she interrupted the tense scene, "look at his hand." They all turned to stare at Alexander's fingers, which moved again, ever so slightly. Victoria gasped while Sterling's face darkened. "A common involuntary response," Sterling dismissed quickly. "Dr. Peterson has documented similar occurrences. Ms. Matthews, please don't encourage unrealistic hopes." But Sarah had seen something in Richard's expression, a flash of the father beneath the businessman. She pressed on carefully. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to try a simple response test. Nothing invasive, just—" Absolutely not. Sterling cut in. Any changes to Alexander's care plan must go through proper channels. Richard, we need to address the board's concerns immediately. Victoria, please ensure Ms. Matthews understands her boundaries. As the men left, Sarah noticed Victoria lingering, her eyes fixed on Alexander's hand. The woman's carefully maintained facade seemed to crack slightly. He used to play this piece, Victoria whispered almost to herself. Not well, he preferred faster music, but on quiet evenings sometimes. She caught herself, straightening her shoulders. The music stops now, Miss Matthews, and I suggest you focus on your assigned duties if you wish to remain employed. Alone with Alexander again, Sarah carefully documented the hand movement and vital sign changes in her private notes. The incident had confirmed her suspicions. There was more going on than simple family dynamics. The rehabilitation funds, Sterling's tight control, the hidden scar, and now this response. Winston appeared at his usual time, jumping onto the bed with familiar grace. This time Sarah was ready. She positioned her phone discreetly, recording as the cat settled near Alexander's hand. The fingers twitched again, more deliberately this time. "Well, Alexander," she whispered, making sure no one was within earshot, "I think it's time we try something different. Your old friend Elena told me about the stables, about Thunder. Tomorrow, we're going to break a few rules." She didn't know if Alexander could hear her, but for a moment, she could have sworn his heart rate changed in response to the horse's name. Sarah smiled, her determination growing stronger. Somewhere beneath the surface of this family's carefully constructed narrative lay the truth about Alexander's condition, and she was going to find it no matter the cost. Dawn had barely broken when Sarah began implementing her plan. She'd spent days studying the mansion's routines, noting the brief window between staff shifts when the grounds were least monitored. Victoria wouldn't arrive for her morning inspection for another 2 hours, and Sterling was due in court for the day. With careful precision, Sarah prepared Alexander for transport in his specialized wheelchair. She'd already secretly modified it with additional support and monitoring equipment, drawing on her experience with similar cases at St. Mary's. The morning air was crisp as she navigated the chair down the service ramp she'd discovered during her explorations. "Trust me, Alexander," she whispered, checking his vitals on the portable monitor. "Sometimes the best therapy isn't found in medical textbooks." The stables lay at the far end of the estate, a magnificent structure that spoke of the Harrisons' equestrian heritage. Elena had told her that Thunder, Alexander's horse, was still kept there, though no one had ridden him since the accident. As they approached, an elderly stableman emerged, his weathered face breaking into a surprised smile. "Master Alexander," his voice cracked with emotion, "I knew you'd come back someday." "Mr. Collins?" Sarah recognized him from Elena's description. "I'm Sarah Matthews, Alexander's nurse. Elena mentioned you might be willing to help us." The old man's eyes welled up as he moved closer to Alexander's chair. "Every day I've kept Thunder ready, just in case. That horse, he knows something's wrong. Won't let anyone else ride him." Inside the stable, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of hay and leather. Sarah carefully positioned Alexander's chair near Thunder's stall. The magnificent bay stallion approached cautiously, his ears pricked forward with interest. "Easy now," Collins murmured, leading the horse closer. "Look who's here, old friend." Thunder stretched his neck forward, nostrils flaring as he caught Alexander's scent. Then, to Sarah's amazement, the horse gently lowered his head until his muzzle was inches from Alexander's hand. The monitors began showing changes, subtle at first, then more pronounced. Alexander's breathing pattern shifted, his heart rate increasing slightly. And there, a definite finger movement, more coordinated than the previous twitches. "The day of the accident," Collins said quietly, watching the interaction. "Thunder came back alone, agitated. I'd never seen him like that. When they found Alexander at the far paddock, well, the story never sat right with me." Sarah pulled out her phone, documenting the vital sign changes. "What do you mean?" "Thunder's a bomb-proof horse, especially with Alexander. They won national, junior championships together. But that day," Collins hesitated, "there were marks on Thunder's flanks, like someone had used spurs. Alexander never used spurs, not once in all his years riding." A sound from Alexander's throat, barely audible but definitely there, made them both freeze. Sarah quickly checked the monitors, her heart racing. The readings showed increased brain activity, more than she'd seen since starting at the mansion. "His riding boots," Collins continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They were missing, never found them, but Alexander always wore his lucky boots for riding, had his initials stamped on the leather. Miss Victoria said he must have lost them in the fall, but..." The sudden crunch of gravel outside made them all jump. Thunder snorted, backing away from the stall door. Sarah's stomach dropped as she recognized the sound of Victoria's car. "Quick," Collins urged, already moving to help with the wheelchair. "Through the back. There's a service path that leads to the east wing. I'll distract them." As Sarah hurriedly wheeled Alexander back toward the mansion, her mind was racing. The missing boots, the unexplained spur marks, Alexander's response to thunder. Pieces of a puzzle were starting to form, but the picture they suggested was troubling. They barely made it back to Alexander's room before Victoria's heels could be heard in the hallway. Sarah had just finished settling him back in bed when the door opened. "Miss Matthews," Victoria's voice was sharp with suspicion. "Why is Alexander's hair damp?" "Morning hygiene routine, Mrs. Harrison," Sarah replied smoothly, grateful she'd thought to mist his hair as part of the cover story. "I tried a new therapeutic cleaning technique that Dr. Peterson mentioned." Victoria's eyes narrowed, scanning the room as if searching for evidence of deception. "I see. And these elevated readings on his morning chart?" "Natural variations in his circadian rhythm," Sarah explained, maintaining her professional tone. "Actually, I've been meaning to discuss some patterns I've noticed in his morning responses." But Victoria had moved to the window, staring out at the grounds. Her perfectly manicured hand touched the glass briefly. "You know, Ms. Matthews, curiosity can be a dangerous thing in this house, especially when it leads to unauthorized explorations." The threat in her voice was unmistakable. Yet as she turned to leave, Sarah caught something else in her expression: fear. Not the fear of discovery, but something deeper, more personal. Alone again with Alexander, Sarah checked his vitals one more time. The readings had stabilized, but they were markedly different from his baseline of the past weeks. Progress, however small, had been made. She retrieved his journal from its hiding place, turning to the last entry before the accident. The page was wrinkled as if it had been wet and dried. Most of the writing was illegible, but one line stood out clearly. "I know what they did. Tomorrow, I'll prove it." The confrontation Sarah had been dreading came sooner than expected. That evening, Dr. Peterson arrived for an unscheduled visit, his usual polite demeanor replaced by barely concealed hostility. Victoria and Sterling flanked him as he reviewed Alexander's charts, his frown deepening with each page. "These readings are concerning," he announced, looking directly at Sarah. "The fluctuations suggest inappropriate stimulation. Mrs. Harrison tells me you've been experimenting with unauthorized treatments." Sarah stood her ground. "I've been following standard care protocols, Dr. Peterson, but I've also been documenting Alexander's responses to environmental stimuli. His reactions suggest a level of awareness that..." "Ms. Matthews," Sterling cut in smoothly, "your enthusiasm is admirable, but potentially dangerous. Dr. Peterson and I have discussed the situation, and we feel it's best to implement some changes." He produced a document from his briefcase. "We're bringing in a specialist from the Sterling Medical Group to oversee Alexander's care. You'll be reassigned to basic nursing duties only." "The Sterling Medical Group?" Sarah kept her voice steady despite her growing alarm. "Your own company, Mr. Sterling? Isn't that a conflict of interest?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Victoria shifted uncomfortably, but Sterling's smile never wavered. "My medical facilities have an excellent reputation, Ms. Matthews. Furthermore, as Alexander's legal guardian, I have sole discretion over his care decisions." A noise from the doorway made them all turn. Richard Harrison stood there, his face ashen. "James, you promised no major changes without consulting me." "Richard," Sterling's tone was patronizing, "we've discussed this. Your emotional involvement makes it difficult for you to make objective decisions. The board agrees that..." "The board?" Richard's voice rose. "Since when does the board have any say in my son's medical care?" Sarah watched the interplay carefully. noting how Victoria seemed to shrink into herself, her hands clasped tightly together. Something about her reaction didn't fit with the imperious woman who'd first hired Sarah. "Perhaps," Sarah interjected, carefully, "we should consider Alexander's own wishes. His journal entries suggest he was very interested in alternative therapies before the accident." The effect was immediate. Victoria's head snapped up, her face draining of color. Sterling took a step forward, his composure cracking for the first time. "Journal? What journal?" But Richard was already moving to Alexander's bedside table, pulling open drawers. "Alexander kept a journal? Why wasn't I told about this?" "It's nothing," Victoria said quickly, too quickly. "Just teenage ramblings. We put it away with his other things after... A sudden beeping from the monitors interrupted the tension. Alexander's readings were spiking again, more dramatically than before. Sarah moved to check his vitals, her professional training taking over. "Everyone needs to leave," she announced firmly. "This level of stress isn't good for him." To her surprise, it was Dr. Peterson who backed her up. "She's right. We should continue this discussion elsewhere." Was it Sarah's imagination, or did he seem almost relieved for the interruption? As the others filed out, Victoria lingered. For a moment, she stood by Alexander's bed, her carefully maintained facade crumbling slightly. "I never meant..." she whispered, then caught herself. "Ms. Matthews, whatever you think you know..." "Mrs. Harrison," Sarah replied quietly, "I think there's a lot that everyone in this house needs to say out loud. For Alexander's sake." Left alone with her patient, Sarah checked his readings again. The spikes were subsiding, but something had definitely triggered them. She pulled out the journal, studying the last entry again. The wrinkled pages, the missing boots, Thunder's reaction, Sterling's control over the family's medical and financial decisions. It all pointed to something much bigger than a simple riding accident. A soft knock made her jump. Eleanor stood in the doorway, clutching something wrapped in old towels. "Miss Matthews," the housekeeper whispered, "I found these in the back of Miss Victoria's closet while cleaning." She carefully unwrapped the bundle, revealing a pair of worn riding boots. The initials AH were clearly visible on the leather, along with something else, dark stains that might have been mud or... "The thing is," Elena continued, her voice trembling, "I was there that morning. I heard Mr. Sterling and Ms. Victoria arguing about company documents, something about proof and shareholders. Then Alexander came in saying he was going riding, but the look on Ms. Victoria's face when she saw him, I've never forgotten it." Sarah took the boots carefully, her mind racing. "Eleanor, we need to find Richard Harrison now, and we need to make sure Sterling doesn't know we have these." The old housekeeper nodded, but her expression was fearful. "Be careful, Miss Matthews. The last person who asked too many questions about that day, they didn't just leave, they disappeared." The next morning dawned grey and misty, matching Sarah's troubled mood. She'd spent a sleepless night studying Alexander's journal entries, comparing dates and details with the information Elena had provided. The boots remained hidden in her quarters, wrapped in clean towels and secured in her locked medical supply case. Her usual morning routine with Alexander felt different now, charged with unspoken tension. As she checked his vitals, she noticed subtle changes in his responses, more frequent finger movements, variations in his breathing patterns when she spoke about specific topics. "Your father's company is having its annual shareholder meeting today," she said quietly, watching the monitors. "Eleanor mentioned you used to attend those. In fact, according to your journal, you were supposed to present something at last year's meeting, weren't you?" The spike in his readings was unmistakable. A soft knock interrupted her observations. Richard Harrison entered, looking exhausted but determined. He closed the door carefully behind him. "Ms. Matthews," he said, his voice low, "I need to know exactly what you found in my son's journal." Sarah studied him carefully. "Sir, before I share that, I need to understand something. Why did you really give up guardianship of Alexander to James Sterling?" Richard sank into a chair, suddenly looking every bit his 50 years. "I didn't give it up, not willingly. After Alexander's accident, James presented documents showing I was emotionally unstable. unfit to make medical decisions. The board supported him, claiming it was in the best interest of both Alexander and Harrison Industries. And you didn't fight it? Fight it? Richard's laugh was bitter. With what? James had everything locked down. Medical reports, psychological evaluations, even Alexander's trust fund. Victoria supported him, saying I was too emotional, too focused on experimental treatments instead of accepting reality. Sarah moved closer, lowering her voice. Mr. Harrison, what was Alexander planning to present at that shareholder meeting? The color drained from Richard's face. How did you... He glanced at his son's still form. Alexander had been investigating some discrepancies in the company's charitable foundation, funds that were supposed to go to medical research, diverted somewhere else. He was always better with numbers than I was. Saw patterns I missed. Sarah's heart was pounding. And James, Sterling was involved with the foundation? He managed it, still does. Richard stood, moving to his son's bedside. The morning of the accident, Alexander said he had proof of something big. He was going to show me after his ride, but... A commotion in the hallway made them both freeze. Victoria's voice, unusually agitated, was approaching. James, you can't do this. We had an agreement. Sterling's reply was cold. Agreements change, Victoria, especially when people start asking inconvenient questions. The door burst open. Sterling entered, followed by Victoria and two men in suits. Sarah recognized the corporate logo on their briefcases, Sterling Medical Group. Richard, Sterling's smile was shark-like. Perfect timing. These gentlemen are here to facilitate Alexander's transfer to my private facility. Given the recent complications in his care, we feel it's best to move him immediately. Transfer? Sarah stepped forward. That's not medically advisable. Alexander's been showing signs of increased responsiveness. Moving him now could... Your services are no longer required, Miss Matthews. Sterling cut her off. Security will escort you off the premises. Richard, the paperwork is already prepared. As Alexander's legal guardian... No. Richard's voice was quiet but firm. Not this time, James. He pulled out his phone, holding up an email. I just received this from our old family lawyer. Interesting timing, isn't it? Apparently, he's been holding some documents Alexander left with him. Insurance, he called it. The change in Sterling's expression was subtle, but unmistakable. Victoria made a small, choked sound. Richard, she stepped forward. Please, you don't understand. We were trying to protect you, protect the company. Protect me, Richard's voice cracked. By hiding the truth about what happened to my son. The monitors tracking Alexander's vital signs began beeping more rapidly. Sarah moved to check them, her medical training warring with her desire to hear more. What she saw made her gasp. Mr. Harrison, she called out urgently, look at this. They all turned to the bed. Alexander's right hand was moving, his fingers curling into a definite, purposeful gesture. One by one, his fingers folded, except for his index finger, which remained pointed directly at Sterling. The silence in the room was deafening. Sterling's composed facade finally cracked, showing a flash of real fear. Victoria pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Well, a new voice spoke from the doorway, making everyone turn. Dr. Peterson stood there, holding a thick file. I believe it's time we all had an honest discussion about what really happened that day. Starting with these medical reports, the real ones, not the versions Mr. Sterling had me submit. Dr. Peterson's revelation sent shockwaves through the room. He moved deliberately to Alexander's bedside, placing the file on the table with careful precision. Sarah noticed his hands were shaking slightly. I've carried this guilt for too long, he said, looking directly at Richard. Your son didn't just fall from his horse that day. His initial injuries were consistent with a confrontation. Defensive wounds on his arms, bruising patterns that suggested he was trying to protect himself. Victoria let out a small sob. Please don't. The truth, Victoria. Richard's voice was steel. All of it. Now. Sterling moved toward the door, but the two men from his medical group surprisingly blocked his path. One of them spoke quietly into a phone. Yes, sir. We have confirmation. Protocol 7 is in effect. You really think you can control this? Sterling's composure was cracking. Everything I did was for the company's benefit. The foundation funds, the experimental research, it would have revolutionized medical treatment. Alexander didn't understand the bigger picture. The bigger picture? Sarah couldn't stay silent any longer. She pulled the riding boots from her medical bag. Like these. Eleanor found them hidden in Mrs. Harrison's closet. The lab can probably still find traces of what happened that day. Victoria crumpled into a chair. I never meant for him to get hurt. James said he just needed time to convince Alexander to stay quiet about the foundation. When I saw him heading to the stables that morning with those documents, you followed him, Richard finished, his voice hollow. Both of you. Dr. Peterson picked up the narrative, his professional demeanor wavering. They brought him in through the service entrance. The official story was already prepared. A riding accident, a traumatic brain injury. I was told my cooperation would ensure continued funding for my research program. I convinced myself it was for the greater good. Sarah watched Alexander's monitors carefully as the truth unfolded. His readings showed heightened activity, suggesting he was aware of the revelations happening around him. The foundation money, Richard turned to Sterling, where did it really go? Classified research. Sterling's laugh was borderline hysterical. Experimental treatments that could have made us billions. Alexander found the offshore accounts, traced the test subjects. He was going to ruin everything with his naive idealism about ethics and transparency. The corporate representatives moved further into the room, their posture subtly threatening. The one on the phone spoke again. Sir, the board members are assembled. They're waiting for your signal. Richard straightened, suddenly looking more like the powerful businessman he was. Those aren't Sterling Medical Group employees, James. They're from the company's internal security team. I called an emergency board meeting this morning. They've been watching this whole time through their phones. Sterling's face went ash-gray. You can't... I have controlling interest. Not anymore. Richard held up his phone again. Alexander's documents. They prove you've been embezzling from the foundation for years. The board has already voted to remove you. Victoria's signed statement about what really happened that day is just the final nail. Victoria stood shakily. I've already told them everything, James. What you threatened to do if I didn't help you cover it up. What really happened at the stables, I can't live with it anymore. A sudden movement from the bed drew everyone's attention. Alexander's hand was moving again, more purposefully than before. Sarah rushed to his side, her medical training kicking in as she noticed other subtle changes. Eye movement behind. Closed lids, increased muscle tension. He's fighting to wake up, she announced, quickly adjusting his monitors. The emotional stimulus of hearing the truth. Mr. Harrison, I need everyone to clear the room except you and Dr. Peterson. As security led Sterling away, his facade finally shattered completely. You don't understand the research we were doing, the breakthroughs we were close to. Sometimes progress requires sacrifice. Victoria paused at the door, looking back at Alexander, with tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I was a coward. I chose the wrong side. I just hope someday... But whatever she hoped remained unsaid as Dr. Peterson ushered her out. The door closed, leaving Sarah, Richard, and Dr. Peterson alone with Alexander, whose vital signs continued to show increasing signs of consciousness. The next few hours are critical, Sarah explained, already preparing emergency response equipment. The psychological impact of processing these revelations could be the catalyst his mind has been waiting for. But we need to be careful. Too much stimulus could overwhelm him. Richard took his son's hand, his own composure finally breaking. I'm here, son. I should have seen what was happening, should have protected you, but I'm here now and I'm not going anywhere. Dr. Peterson moved to help Sarah with the medical preparations, his professional mask back in place, but his eyes showing deep emotion. I'll contact the specialists I originally recommended, the ones Sterling blocked. We'll need their expertise. For what comes next? Sarah checked Alexander's responses again, hope rising in her chest. Sometimes healing started with truth, no matter how painful, and as the morning sun finally broke through the mist outside, she saw Alexander's eyelids flutter, just slightly but unmistakably, for the first time since she'd arrived at the mansion. The next 48 hours in the Harrison mansion were a delicate dance between hope and caution. Sarah barely left Alexander's side, monitoring every slight change in his condition. The team of specialists Dr. Peterson had called in arrived. Within hours, neurologists, physical therapists, and cognitive rehabilitation experts who had been kept away by Sterling's interference. His brain activity patterns are remarkably strong, Dr. Amanda Chen, a leading neurologist in consciousness recovery, explained as she reviewed Alexander's latest scans. It's as if his mind has been fighting to surface for months, but something was holding him back. The emotional trigger of hearing the truth might have been the key his brain needed. Sarah watched as the specialists worked with Alexander, their expertise confirming what she'd suspected all along. His responses were becoming more consistent, finger movements, eye fluttering, changes in breathing patterns when spoken to. But it was the moment Winston jumped onto the bed, against all hospital protocols, that truly demonstrated his growing awareness. "Look at his hand," Sarah pointed out to Richard, who hadn't left the room except when the medical team required. "Say it." Alexander's fingers had moved deliberately toward the cat's fur, not just twitching but actually seeking contact. Richard's eyes filled with tears. He always said that cat understood him better than anyone. "I should have noticed when Winston kept trying to get into his room, should have noticed so many things." The mansion itself was transforming. Security teams swept through Sterling's office and Victoria's private rooms, uncovering more evidence of the Foundation's misused funds. Victoria, under house arrest in the East Wing, had provided a full statement to the authorities about her role in the cover-up. She revealed how Sterling had manipulated her own guilty secrets to ensure her compliance, threatening to expose financial irregularities from her past that would have affected her custody agreement with her children from a previous marriage. Elena and Collins became regular visitors to Alexander's room, sharing stories and memories that seemed to generate responses from their patient. Collins brought in recordings of Thunder's neighing, and the medical team noted significant brain activity increases when Alexander heard his horse. "The brain creates strong emotional connections to sensory memories," Dr. Chen explained. "Every familiar sound, smell, or touch could help rebuild neural pathways that have been suppressed." Sarah had incorporated these insights into an intensive therapeutic program, carefully documented, to contrast with Sterling's deliberately minimal approach. The difference in Alexander's care was stark. Instead of being treated as a body to be maintained, he was now at the center of a holistic recovery effort that engaged all his senses and emotions. One evening, as Sarah was adjusting Alexander's physical therapy equipment, Richard entered with a laptop. "I found something," he said quietly. In Alexander's cloud storage, videos he recorded before everything happened. Sarah helped, positioned the computer where Alexander could hear it clearly. The video started playing, showing a younger, vibrant Alexander sitting at a desk. "Dad, if you're watching this, then something's happened to me." The recorded Alexander spoke clearly and confidently. "I've stored all the Foundation documents, securely. The offshore accounts, the unauthorized experiments, everything Sterling's been hiding. But that's not why I made this video." Richard's hands trembled as his son's voice continued. "I need you to know that I understand now. All those years you pushed me to learn the business, to be worthy of the Harrison name. It wasn't about the money or the legacy. It was about responsibility, about using our resources to help people, not exploit them. Sterling's betrayed that principle, and I can't stand by and watch." The monitors showed Alexander's heart rate increasing as he heard his own voice. "I'm meeting Sterling tomorrow. He doesn't know what I've found yet, but I'm taking precautions. If anything happens, to me Elena knows where to find the backup files. And Dad, I'm sorry if I ever made you think I didn't appreciate everything you taught me. I do, that's why I have to do this." The video ended, and the room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors. Then, a new sound, faint but distinct. A moan from Alexander's throat, his first voluntary vocalization since the accident. Sarah rushed to his side, professional training warring with excitement. "Alexander, can you hear us?" His eyelids fluttered more strongly than before, and his fingers moved against his father's hand. Richard leaned closer, hope and fear warring in his expression. "Son." The next few moments seemed to stretch into eternity. Then, slowly but unmistakably, Alexander's eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, but as Sarah adjusted the bed's position and the room's lighting, his gaze began to track movement. "Take it easy," Sarah cautioned, already documenting his responses. "This is just the beginning. The road ahead will be long and challenging." But as she watched Alexander's eyes find his father's face, saw the faint but definite attempt at a smile, she knew that the greatest obstacle had been overcome. The truth had finally broken through the walls of silence and deception, and with it came the chance for real healing. Dr. Chen was already adjusting treatment protocols, consulting with her team about the next steps. The room buzzed with cautious excitement and professional focus. Yet in the midst of it all, Sarah noticed something that the medical readings couldn't quantify. The way Alexander's expression changed when Winston curled up next to him, purring softly. It was a look of peace, of coming home. The first week, after Alexander's awakening, was a delicate balance of medical necessity and emotional healing. Every small victory was celebrated, every setback met with determined optimism. Sarah found herself coordinating not just his physical care, but also the complex emotional dynamics of a family, rebuilding itself from the ground up. "Remember," she cautioned during a team meeting with the specialists, "his mind has been active all this time, processing everything around him. We need to be prepared for the psychological impact as his ability to communicate improves." Dr. Chen's team had developed a specialized communication system, starting with simple eye movements and progressing to hand signals. Alexander's first clear message, spelled out laboriously through a letterboard, was characteristically direct. "Thunder okay." When Collins brought photos showing the horse healthy and waiting in the stables, Alexander's relief was visible. His next message was more challenging. "Victoria?" Richard, who had been managing both the company crisis and Alexander's care, hesitated before responding. "She's cooperating with the authorities, son. Her statement helped expose Sterling's whole operation. She wants to talk to you when you're ready." Alexander's improved awareness had revealed a practical challenge. His mind was sharp and eager to communicate, but his body required extensive rehabilitation. Sarah worked with the physical therapy team to develop a program that would rebuild his strength without overwhelming his recovering systems. "Patience," she reminded him, during a particularly frustrating session when his hands wouldn't cooperate with the fine motor exercises. "Your body needs time to remember." Alexander's response was to give her a look that clearly conveyed his frustration, followed by a deliberate eye roll that made everyone in the room laugh. His sense of humor, it seemed, had survived intact. The media attention was carefully managed, with Richard issuing a brief statement about Alexander's improving condition and the ongoing corporate investigation. Sterling's arrest had made headlines, but the family maintained privacy around Alexander's recovery process. One morning, Sarah arrived for her shift to find Alexander already awake, working with determination on his speech exercises. His voice was still weak, but his first clearly spoken word, "Dad," had brought tears to everyone's eyes the day before. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she admonished gently, checking his vitals. "Time lost," he managed to articulate, each word a victory of will over weakness. "Need truth." Sarah understood. The medical team had warned about potential memory gaps around the actual incident, but Alexander's journal and video had proven his mind was very much aware of the events leading up to it. Now he wanted to fill in the blanks. Elena brought in his old journal, along with a laptop containing his recovered files. Working with the speech therapist, Alexander began the painstaking process of sharing his story. The foundation documents he'd discovered, the unauthorized experiment Sterling had been funding, the confrontation at the stables when Victoria had tried to stop him from going to the board. "Not her fault," he insisted when Victoria's name came up. "Sterling threatened her. Kids." Richard spent hours with his son, their conversations moving gradually from basic communication to deeper reconciliation. The years of misunderstanding and pressure began to heal as they found new ways to connect. The most significant breakthrough came during Alexander's first supervised visit to the stables. Supported by his medical team and seated in a specialized wheelchair, he finally reunited with Thunder. The horse approached cautiously, but the moment of recognition between them was profound. Alexander's hand, still shaky but growing stronger, reached up to touch Thunder's nose. "Remember," he whispered, his voice stronger in the presence of his old friend. That evening, Sarah found Alexander working with renewed determination on his exercises. His message board spelled out a clear, "Glad you'll want to ride again." "One step at a time," she reminded him, but couldn't help smiling at his ambition. The medical team had been amazed by his progress, far exceeding typical recovery patterns for similar cases. A soft knock at the door revealed Victoria, hovering uncertainly at the threshold. It was her first visit since Alexander had awakened. The room grew tense, but Alexander's hand moved deliberately toward his communication board. "Come in," he managed to say aloud, his voice quiet but clear. Victoria stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Alexander, I'm so sorry. I should have been stronger. Should have found another way." Alexander's fingers moved slowly but purposefully across his letterboard, forming words that Sarah read aloud. "We all made mistakes. Time to heal now." The simple wisdom of his response seemed to lift a weight from the room. Victoria sat carefully beside his bed, and for the first time since Sarah had known her, the elegant facade cracked completely. She began to talk, really talk, about her fears, her regrets, and her hope for redemption. Sarah watched the scene unfold, noting how Alexander's vital signs remained strong and steady. Sometimes the best medicine wasn't found in medical textbooks or therapy protocols. Sometimes it was as simple as the truth, finally spoken aloud, and the choice to move forward together. 3 months into Alexander's recovery, the Harrison Mansion had transformed into a state-of-the-art rehabilitation center. The East Wing now housed specialized equipment, and the gardens had been modified to include therapeutic walking paths. Sarah coordinated with a team of professionals, each focused on different aspects of Alexander's journey back to full health. "Your progress is remarkable," Dr. Chen commented during a morning evaluation. "The brain scans show significant regeneration of neural pathways. However," she paused, glancing at Sarah. "Time to increase challenges," Alexander finished for her, his speech now clear though still measured. Months of intensive therapy had strengthened his voice, along with his determination. Sarah watched him during his physical therapy session, noting how far he'd come from those first tentative movements. Now he could sit independently, stand with support, and was working tirelessly toward walking again. But it was his cognitive recovery that truly amazed everyone. "The company reports," he said during a break, gesturing to the tablet Richard had brought him. "The Foundation's legitimate projects need to continue. People depend on that research." Richard, who had been balancing company reconstruction with Alexander's care, looked up from his own work. "The board's audit is complete. Sterling's network has been exposed, and the legitimate research projects are being reviewed for continuation." "Not enough," Alexander shook his head. "Need to do more. Sarah, my notes?" Sarah helped him access his laptop, where he'd been documenting ideas between therapy sessions. His typing was still slow, but his mind was sharp as ever. The screen showed plans for restructuring the Foundation, focusing on ethical medical research and accessibility programs. "You need to focus on your recovery," Richard started, but Alexander cut him off. "This is recovery, Dad. Fixing what was broken, all of it." Victoria, who had been quietly supporting Alexander's rehabilitation while dealing with her own legal issues, spoke up from where she sat arranging his medication schedule. "He's right, Richard. The Foundation's mission was always about helping people. Sterling corrupted that, but we can restore it." Sarah noticed Alexander's expression soften at Victoria's words. Their relationship had evolved over the months, moving from complicated past to cautious present. Victoria had thrown herself into supporting his recovery, attending every therapy session she was allowed to and learning everything she could about his treatment. The afternoon brought a special milestone. Alexander's first supervised session in the hydrotherapy pool. As Sarah and the physical therapist helped him into the water, she remembered his words from weeks earlier. Water feels like freedom. "Ready to try those new exercises?" she asked, supporting him as he found his balance in the pool. "Born ready," he grinned, then turned serious. "Sarah, thank you, not just for this, for seeing me when I couldn't show myself." The moment was interrupted by excited barking. A golden retriever puppy, part of Alexander's new therapy program, had managed to escape his handler and was bouncing around the pool area. "Max," Alexander called out, his voice warm with affection. The puppy had been Dr. Chen's suggestion, a way to complement Winston's calming presence with more active interaction. The young dog's energy and need for training gave Alexander additional motivation in his recovery. "He's as stubborn as you are," Sarah laughed, watching Max attempt to join them in the pool before being caught by his handler. "Good trait," Alexander winked. "Got me this far." Later that evening, Sarah found Alexander in the renovated study, surrounded by papers and his therapy equipment. He was video conferencing with the Foundation's legitimate research partners, his voice tired but clear as he discussed future directions. "The scandal hurt a lot of good projects," he explained to Sarah after the call. "Need to rebuild trust, show that ethical research can make real change." "One step at a time," she reminded him, checking his vitals. The day's activities had been demanding, but his readings were strong. "Speaking of steps," he gestured to his wheelchair, then to the parallel bars that had been installed in the room. "One more try?" Sarah assessed his condition carefully. He'd already completed his scheduled therapy for the day, but his determination was one of his greatest strengths when properly channeled. 3 minutes only," she agreed, moving to spot him. "And we stop at the first sign of fatigue." Alexander's face set in concentration as he gripped the bars. His arms trembled slightly with effort, but his movements were more coordinated than even a week ago. Each small movement represented hours of therapy, determination, and the support of everyone around him. "You know," he said between controlled breaths, taking a small step forward, "been thinking about the future. All those people Sterling's actions hurt. They deserve better. We could help them." Sarah steadied him as he took another step. "One challenge at a time, remember?" "Life's full of challenges," he countered, managing a third step before needing to rest. "Trick is finding the right people to face them with." As if on cue, Richard appeared in the doorway, returning from a late board meeting. He froze, watching his son standing at the parallel bars. The papers he was holding slipped forgotten from his hands. "Dad," Alexander called out, his voice strong despite his fatigue. "Want to help spot me? Taking some big steps here." The metaphor wasn't lost on any of them, as Richard moved to stand opposite Sarah, supporting his son from the other side. Alexander took another step forward, toward whatever future they would now build together. 6 months into Alexander's recovery, the Harrison estate buzzed with an energy that seemed to mirror its residents' growing strength. The rehabilitation wing had become a model facility, attracting attention from medical professionals interested in its innovative approach to recovery. Sarah found herself not just coordinating Alexander's care, but also documenting their methods for potential implementation elsewhere. "The combination of traditional and alternative therapies is key," she explained to a visiting medical team. "But the most important factor is treating the whole person, not just the condition." Alexander, now able to walk short distances with a walker, had thrown himself into both his physical recovery and the Foundation's reformation. The study had been converted into a combination therapy space and office, where he could transition smoothly between rehabilitation exercises and Foundation work. "Look at this," he called to Sarah one morning, his voice strong and clear. His speech therapy had progressed to the point where he only occasionally needed to pause to find words. "New research proposal from Dr. Chen's team, integrating our recovery protocols into standard rehabilitation programs." Sarah reviewed the documents, noting how their experience with Alexander had influenced the proposed methodology. "You're going to change a lot of lives with this." "We already are." He smiled, nodding toward the window. Outside, the first group of patients was arriving for the pilot program he'd initiated, offering advanced rehabilitation services to those who couldn't afford private care. Victoria had surprised everyone by becoming one of the program's strongest advocates. She'd transformed her guilt into purpose, using her organizational skills and social connections to secure funding and support. Currently, she was showing a young patient's family around the grounds, her natural elegance now softened by genuine warmth. "She's found her calling," Alexander observed, watching his stepmother interact with the family. "Never seen her so real." The sound of hooves on gravel drew their attention. Collins was leading Thunder around the newly installed therapeutic riding arena, where Alexander had recently begun limited riding therapy sessions. The horse's careful movements with novice riders showed an almost intuitive understanding of their needs. "Ready for your session?" Sarah asked, checking his vitals out of habit. His readings had been consistently strong, but she maintained careful monitoring of his activity levels. "Actually," Alexander's eyes twinkled with familiar determination, "I want to try something new today." He led the way to the arena, his walker forgotten in favor of the cane he now used for shorter distances. Sarah walked beside him, alert, but no longer needing to hover quite so closely. His balance had improved significantly, and his confidence had grown with his strength. "Collins," he called out, "bring Thunder over." The old stableman's face lit up as he led the horse to them. Thunder's ears pricked forward in recognition, and he lowered his head to Alexander's shoulder in what had become their usual greeting. "Think it's time," Alexander said quietly, running his hand along Thunder's neck. "Sarah, would you and Collins help me up, just to sit for a few minutes?" Sarah exchanged glances with Collins, both of them assessing Alexander's condition. His physical therapy had been progressing well, but actual riding hadn't been scheduled to begin for another few weeks. "5 minutes only," she agreed finally, "and we use the mounting ramp." Richard arrived just as they were helping Alexander settle into the saddle. He stopped at the arena fence, his expression a mix of pride and reflexive concern. Victoria joined him, followed by Max the therapy dog, who sat obediently watching the proceedings. Alexander's face glowed with quiet joy as he adjusted to the familiar feel of being on horseback. Thunder stood perfectly still, as if understanding the importance of the moment. For a few precious minutes, horse and rider were reunited, rebuilding a bond that not even tragedy had broken. "You know," Alexander said thoughtfully as they helped him dismount later, "everyone keeps talking about my recovery like it's some kind of miracle, but that's not quite right." "Oh?" Sarah steadied him as he regained his balance on the ground. "The real miracle," he continued, his voice warm with emotion, "is how this whole experience has healed more than just me. Look around." Sarah followed his gaze. Richard and Victoria were walking the grounds together, discussing plans for expanding the rehabilitation program. Collins was showing another patient's family how to groom a therapy pony. Through the windows of the mansion, they could see Dr. Chen's team setting up for afternoon sessions. "The foundation's doing real good now," Alexander went on. "Dad and Victoria are working together instead of just existing in the same space. Even this place, it's not just a mansion anymore. It's becoming something that matters." Max bounded over, offering his support as Alexander began the walk back to the house. Sarah watched him move, remembering the still form she'd first encountered in that sterile bedroom. His progress wasn't just physical. He'd grown into someone who could take a tragedy and transform it into purpose. "You know what the best part is?" he asked, pausing to catch his breath near the garden. "Everyone thought I was trapped in silence, but you heard me anyway. And now," he gestured to the activity around them, "now we're helping others find their voices too." A group of rehabilitation patients was gathering for their afternoon therapy session, their faces showing varying degrees of determination and hope. Each of them had a story, a journey, a fight ahead of them. But thanks to the changes in the Harrison Foundation, they wouldn't have to fight alone. "So," Alexander grinned, his old spark fully present in his eyes, "ready to help me with my next big idea? Because I've been thinking about expanding the program." Sarah laughed, recognizing the tone that meant he was about to propose something ambitious and probably challenging. But then she realized That's exactly what had brought them all to this point. The willingness to believe in possibilities, even when they seemed impossible. 1 year after Alexander's awakening, the Harrison estate had become unrecognizable from its former self. The once imposing gates now welcomed a steady stream of patients and their families, while the gardens bloomed with therapeutic plants and accessible pathways. Sarah, now the facility's chief of rehabilitation services, watched the transformation with a sense of pride and purpose. The board approved the expansion plans, Alexander announced during their morning meeting. He moved around the conference room with growing confidence, using a sleek carbon fiber cane more for balance than support. We're breaking ground on the new wing next month. The rehabilitation center's success had exceeded everyone's expectations. Dr. Chen's research team had documented unprecedented recovery rates, attributing them to their holistic approach and the supportive community environment they'd created. The waiting list keeps growing, Victoria added, reviewing the admission requests on her tablet. Her role as patient relations director had revealed a natural talent for connecting with families in crisis. We need to consider additional staff for the new wing. Richard, who had restructured Harrison Industries to prioritize medical innovation and accessibility technology, nodded in agreement. I've been talking with several universities about establishing a training program. We could offer internships, create a pipeline for specialized rehabilitation professionals. Sarah smiled, remembering the tense family dynamic she'd first encountered. Now they worked together seamlessly, each contributing their strengths to a shared vision. Even the mansion's staff had evolved, with Eleanor heading up a support program for caregivers and Collins developing an expanded equine therapy curriculum. There's something else, Alexander said, his expression turning serious. The Sterling case is finally going to trial next month. The prosecutor wants me to testify. A heavy silence fell over the room. Sterling's arrest had led to the discovery of a vast network of illegal medical research and financial fraud. His trial would bring national attention and scrutiny to the Harrison family and foundation. Are you sure you're ready for that? Sarah asked, her medical instincts kicking in. Alexander's recovery had been remarkable, but public speaking could still be challenging when he was tired. Ready or not, it needs to be done, he replied firmly. Too many people were hurt by his actions. They deserved to see justice served. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she set down her tablet. I'll be testifying too, about everything. The threats, the cover-up, all of it. Richard reached across the table to squeeze her hand supportively. Their relationship had evolved into a genuine partnership, strengthened by their shared commitment to making amends for past mistakes. Later that afternoon, Sarah found Alexander in the therapeutic riding arena, watching a young patient take her first supported ride on Thunder. The horse moved with gentle precision, guided by Collins's experienced hand. Remember my first time back in the saddle? Alexander asked, smiling at the memory. I could barely sit up straight for 5 minutes. Now look. He gestured to where Max, the therapy dog, was helping another patient practice walking exercises. The golden retriever had grown into an invaluable member of their team, seeming to instinctively know which patients needed physical support and which needed emotional comfort. We're making a difference, Sarah agreed, checking his schedule for the afternoon. The Foundation's approach is being adopted by rehabilitation centers across the country. It's more than that, Alexander said thoughtfully. We're showing people that recovery isn't just about physical healing, it's about finding purpose again. Look at Victoria, she's completely transformed. Dad's rediscovered what the company was meant to be about. Even the staff, they're part of something meaningful now. The sound of laughter drew their attention to the garden, where a group of patients was participating in a horticultural therapy session. Among them was a teenage girl who had arrived 3 weeks ago, unable to speak after a traumatic brain injury. Now she was smiling, communicating through sign language as she planted seedlings with her therapist. I've been thinking, Alexander continued, his voice taking on the tone that Sarah had learned meant a new project was forming in his mind. About all the families who can't come here for treatment. We have the protocols, the research, the experience. What if we could bring it to them? Sarah raised an eyebrow, already anticipating where this was going. Mobile rehabilitation units? Better. His eyes lit up with excitement. A network of satellite centers, each adapted to their local community's needs. We could train local healthcare providers, provide resources and support. Make this accessible to everyone who needs it. As they discussed the possibilities, Sarah noticed something that might have escaped others: the complete absence of his cane as he gestured animatedly, fully engaged in sharing his vision. It was these moments of unconscious progress that meant the most, showing how far he'd come from the silent, immobile patient she'd first met. Of course, he added with a grin, we'll need an experienced director to oversee the program development, someone who knows how to see potential even when others have given up. Sarah laughed, recognizing the job offer for what it was. Are you trying to promote me, Mr. Harrison? Just recognizing talent, Ms. Matthews, he replied, his tone playful but his eyes sincere. After all, you saw something in a patient everyone else had written off. Imagine what you could do with a whole network of rehabilitation centers. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the estate's grounds, highlighting the peaceful activity of patients, families, and staff working together toward recovery. It was a far cry from the oppressive silence Sarah had first encountered, and a powerful testament to what could be achieved when healing became a community effort. The day of Sterling's trial arrived with an unexpected sense of calm. Alexander stood before the mirror in his former bedroom, now converted into a comfortable office space, adjusting his tie with steady hands. His reflection showed a man transformed, not just physically, but in the confident set of his shoulders and the purposeful gleam in his eyes. Your vitals are perfect, Sarah noted, performing one final check before they left. Remember, if you feel overwhelmed during the testimony, I know, he smiled reassuringly. Take a breath, focus on the facts, and remember why we're there. But I won't be overwhelmed, not anymore. The courthouse steps were crowded with media, but the Harrison family moved through the chaos with dignified purpose. Victoria's testimony came first, her voice clear and unwavering as she detailed Sterling's manipulation and the events leading to Alexander's injury. When it was Alexander's turn, he walked to the witness stand without assistance, each step a testament to his recovery. Mr. Harrison, the prosecutor began, could you tell the court about your discovery of the Foundation's misused funds? Alexander's voice carried through the courtroom, strong and measured. I found discrepancies in the research funding allocations, projects that looked legitimate on paper, but didn't exist in reality. The money was being diverted to unauthorized experiments, procedures that violated every ethical standard we had. As he testified, Sarah watched Sterling's face. The former attorney's composed facade cracked as Alexander methodically exposed the full scope of his crimes, not just against the Harrison family, but against countless vulnerable patients who had been exploited by his schemes. Later that evening, back at the estate, the mood was one of quiet triumph. The prosecution had presented an ironclad case, and Sterling's conviction seemed certain, but Alexander's mind was already moving forward to new challenges. The satellite center proposal is gaining traction, he told Sarah as they walked through the therapy gardens. 3 hospitals have already expressed interest in partnering with us. Their path took them past the evening therapy sessions, where patients worked with dedicated staff members. The sound of encouragement and achievement filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence that had once permeated these grounds. Dad's technology division is developing new adaptive equipment, Alexander continued, pausing to greet a young patient practicing with a prototype mobility device. And Victoria's outreach program has identified communities that desperately need rehabilitation services. Sarah nodded, remembering the frightened family members she'd first encountered here. Now, thanks to Victoria's program, families received comprehensive support alongside their loved ones' treatment. The healing extended far beyond physical rehabilitation. You know what I remember most about those early days? Alexander asked, settling onto a bench near the rose garden, the same garden where he'd later taken his first unassisted steps. The way you talked to me, even when I couldn't respond. You saw me as a person, not just a patient. I saw someone fighting to break through, Sarah replied, thinking back to those challenging first weeks. All you needed was someone to fight alongside you. Their conversation was interrupted by excited barking as Max bounded over, followed by a group of therapy dogs in training. The program had expanded significantly, with specially trained animals now helping patients overcome physical and emotional challenges. Speaking of fighting, Alexander's expression turned thoughtful. I've been working on something new, a foundation scholarship program for medical students interested in rehabilitation therapy. We could train the next generation of professionals who understand that recovery is about more than just physical healing. The sound of hooves drew their attention to the riding arena, where Collins was working with Thunder and a new therapy horse, a gentle mare named Hope. The equine therapy program had become one of their most successful initiatives, helping patients rebuild strength and confidence. Life has a funny way of coming full circle, Alexander mused, watching a young rider mirror his own journey from wheelchair to saddle. Everything Sterling did to try to silence the truth. It ended up creating something extraordinary instead. Sarah looked around at the thriving rehabilitation center, at the patients working towards recovery, the families supporting each other, the staff dedicated to their mission. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us to our greatest purpose. That's exactly what I want to show others, Alexander said, standing with the fluid motion that had once seemed impossible. That there's always hope, always a way forward, if you just have the right support and believe in possibilities. As the sun set over the Harrison estate, casting a warm glow over the grounds, Sarah reflected on how far they'd all come. The silent mansion had transformed into a place of healing and hope, its corridors now filled with the sounds of recovery and renewal. But more than that, it had become a testament to the power of human resilience and the transformative nature of compassionate care. A gentle evening breeze carried the scent of roses, the same roses that Victoria now used in horticultural therapy sessions. Everything had changed, yet somehow become exactly what it was always meant to be. The Harrison legacy was no longer about power or privilege, but about healing and hope, about seeing potential where others saw only limitations. "Ready for tomorrow?" Sarah asked, knowing Alexander had a full schedule of therapy sessions and foundation meetings ahead. He smiled, his expression full of the quiet determination that had carried him through his darkest days. "Ready for anything. After all, we're just getting started." 18 months after Alexander's awakening, the Harrison Rehabilitation Center hosted its first international medical conference. The grand ballroom, once reserved for elite social gatherings, now buzzed with healthcare professionals from around the world, eager to learn about the innovative approaches that had produced such remarkable results. Alexander stood at the podium, his posture confident and natural, no sign of the cane he'd used just months before. Sarah watched from the side of the stage, remembering the long journey that had brought them to this moment. "Welcome to our home," Alexander began, his voice strong and clear. "I say home because that's what this place has become. Not just for my family, but for everyone who comes here seeking healing and hope." The audience included former patients and their families, many of whom had returned to share their stories. Among them sat a young artist who had regained the use of her hands, a former athlete now teaching adaptive sports, and countless others whose lives had been touched by the center's work. 2 years ago, Alexander continued, this was a very different place, a place of silence and secrets. Today we're going to share with you not just our medical protocols, but our fundamental belief that healing happens best when we treat the whole person, not just their condition. Victoria, elegant as ever, but with a new warmth in her bearing, led a session on family support systems. Her personal experience had evolved into expertise, and her program for helping families navigate the rehabilitation journey had become a model for centers worldwide. "The hardest part for families," she explained to her attentive audience, "is feeling helpless. We teach them that they're not just observers in their loved one's recovery, they're essential participants." Richard presented the technology division's latest innovations, adaptive equipment designed with input from patients and therapists. The Harrison Industries research labs had shifted their focus entirely to medical technology and accessibility solutions, with several breakthrough patents already changing lives. During the lunch break, Sarah found Alexander in the therapy gardens, where demonstration sessions were being conducted. He was watching Collins work with a group of rehabilitation professionals, teaching them the basics of equine therapy. "Remember, when this was all just a dream?" he asked as she approached. "Back when I could barely lift my head and you were the only one who believed I might wake up." Sarah smiled, thinking of those early days. "You were always awake inside. You just needed someone to notice. And now look," he gestured to where Thunder was gently helping a patient with balance exercises. "We're teaching others to notice too, to see potential where others see limitations." The afternoon sessions focused on their integrated therapy approach. Dr. Chen presented the neurological research that supported their methods, while Elena and her team demonstrated the importance of creating a supportive community environment. "The healing doesn't stop at the therapy room door," Elena explained, her natural warmth drawing in her audience. "It continues in every interaction, every moment of connection." As the day progressed, Sarah led a workshop on their early intervention protocols. She shared the signs she'd first noticed in Alexander's case, teaching others to recognize and respond to subtle indicators of awareness in seemingly unresponsive patients. "Sometimes," she told the gathered professionals, "the biggest breakthroughs come from simply refusing to accept limitations as final. Every patient has their own way of communicating. Our job is to learn their language." The evening culminated in a dinner celebration in the gardens. Tables were set up among the therapeutic plants and accessible pathways, creating an atmosphere that balanced professional excellence with personal warmth. Current patients mingled with conference attendees, sharing their experiences firsthand. Victoria had arranged for some of their younger patients to provide the entertainment, a music therapy group that had formed spontaneously during their rehabilitation sessions. Their performance, while not technically perfect, demonstrated the essence of their approach to healing: courage, support, and joy in progress. "You know what the best part is?" Alexander said to Sarah as they watched a young pianist who had relearned to play after a stroke. "Every person here tonight will take these ideas back to their own communities. The ripples will keep spreading." The conference had attracted attention from major medical institutions and humanitarian organizations. Proposals for partnerships and satellite centers were pouring in, along with offers to fund research and training programs. "We're going to need to expand the training program," Sarah noted, reviewing the list of interested institutions. "There's already a waiting list for the next certification course." Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about that. What if we created a teaching hospital, not just for medical professionals, but for everyone involved? In rehabilitation, therapists, counselors, support staff, a place where they could learn our holistic approach firsthand." The idea was ambitious, but then Sarah reflected, everything about the Harrison Rehabilitation Center had started as an ambitious idea. From those first tentative attempts to reach Alexander to the thriving international center they'd become, every step had seemed impossible until it was achieved. As the evening wound down, a group of patients surprised Alexander with a special presentation. They'd created a video documenting their journeys, interweaving their stories with the center's evolution. The final message was clear. What had begun as one person's fight for recovery had grown into a movement, touching countless lives and changing the face of rehabilitation medicine. Looking around at the gathered community, patients, families, medical professionals, and staff all united in purpose, Sarah realized that the true healing power of the center wasn't just in its medical protocols or innovative therapies. It was in the belief that every person had potential for growth and that healing was a journey best taken together. The success of the medical conference catalyzed a new phase of growth for the Harrison Rehabilitation Center. As autumn painted the therapeutic gardens in warm colors, the estate hummed with the energy of expansion and innovation. Construction had begun on the new teaching hospital wing, while satellite centers were taking shape in communities across the country. Sarah found Alexander in his favorite spot in the rose garden, reviewing plans with a team of architects. The Millionaire garden itself had become a symbol of their approach to healing, carefully planned yet organic, structured but allowing for natural growth and adaptation. The satellite center in Phoenix just confirmed their opening date, he announced as she joined them. They've already got a waiting list of patients, and the rural outreach program is exceeding all our projections. The outreach program had been Victoria's latest initiative, bringing mobile rehabilitation services to communities without access to specialized care. She had transformed from a society figure into a passionate advocate for accessible healthcare, using her connections to break down barriers and open doors. The first group of international students arrives next week, Sarah added, checking her tablet. 20 healthcare professionals from 10 different countries, all eager to learn our methods. The teaching program had evolved far beyond their initial vision. In addition to medical training, it now included courses in patient advocacy, family support, and community integration. Elena had developed a comprehensive curriculum for support staff, while Collins's equine therapy certification program had a 2-year waiting list. Later that afternoon, Sarah accompanied Alexander to the newly completed pediatric wing, where Max and his team of therapy dogs were working with young patients. The space was bright and welcoming, designed to make rehabilitation feel like play rather than work. Sometimes I wonder, Alexander mused, watching a young girl take her first steps after an accident, her face lighting up as she reached for Max's wagging tail. What would have happened if you hadn't questioned those initial protocols? If you just accepted the limitations others had placed on my recovery? Sarah thought back to those early days, to the quiet rebellion of playing music and allowing Winston into the room. I think the real question is, what would have happened if you hadn't been fighting so hard to break through? You were your own best advocate, even when you couldn't speak. They passed the hydrotherapy pool, where Richard was discussing adaptive swimming techniques with the sports therapy team. The Harrison Industries Technology Division had developed new underwater support systems, making aquatic therapy more accessible for patients with severe mobility limitations. Dad's got 3 new patents pending, Alexander said proudly. The Adaptive Equipment Program is revolutionizing home care options, and Victoria's Foundation for Families in Need has already helped hundreds access treatment they couldn't otherwise afford. The transformation of the Harrison family dynamics was perhaps their greatest success story. Richard and Victoria had found their way back to real partnership, united by their commitment to making a difference. The business empire that had once been built on power and profit now flourished through innovation and compassion. In the main rehabilitation wing, Dr. Chen was conducting a research review with her team. Their ongoing studies of recovery patterns and therapeutic approaches were changing the medical community's understanding of rehabilitation potential. The latest data is remarkable, she told Sarah and Alexander. The combination of traditional and innovative therapies, along with our community support model, is showing success rates that were previously thought impossible. As they walked through the facility, they encountered countless small victories: a stroke patient speaking their first clear words, a trauma survivor taking independent steps, a young athlete returning to modified training. Each success story added to the growing evidence that their approach worked. You know what I love most about this place now? Alexander said as they reached the garden terrace where they often ended their days. It's not just about individual recovery anymore. It's about showing the world what's possible when you combine medical excellence with human connection. The sun was setting over the estate, casting long shadows across the grounds where patients, families, and staff moved through their evening routines. In the distance, Thunder and Hope grazed peacefully in their paddock, while Max supervised a group therapy session on the lawn. We're not just treating conditions, Sarah agreed, watching a family celebrate their loved one's progress with tears of joy. We're changing the way people think about healing itself. Victoria appeared in the doorway, her arms full of program proposals. The board approved all the new initiatives, she announced triumphantly, including the scholarship fund for underprivileged medical students and the international exchange program. The Harrison Rehabilitation Center had become more than a medical facility. It was a beacon of hope, a model for what healthcare could be when compassion met innovation. The silence that had once filled these halls had been replaced by the sounds of healing, learning, and growth. As they reviewed plans for the future, Sarah reflected on how far they'd all come. Alexander's personal journey had sparked a movement that was changing lives around the world. Victoria had found redemption through service. Richard had rediscovered his company's true purpose, and she herself had grown from a dedicated nurse into a pioneer in rehabilitation medicine. The evening air carried the scent of roses, the same roses that had witnessed Alexander's first steps toward recovery. Now they bloomed alongside new gardens, each designed to aid in different aspects of rehabilitation. Like the center itself, they had grown far beyond their original boundaries, spreading hope and healing in unexpected directions. 2 years to the day after Alexander's awakening, the Harrison Rehabilitation Center celebrated a milestone that no one could have imagined. During those dark early days, the facility had successfully treated over 1,000 patients, with its innovative methods being adopted by medical centers worldwide. But today's celebration was about something more personal. Alexander stood at the entrance of the newly completed riding arena, his posture strong and confident. The morning sun glinted off Thunder's coat as Collins led the horse toward them. Sarah watched from nearby, her medical instincts still alert even after all this time, though she knew they weren't really needed anymore. "Ready?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Been ready for this my whole life," Alexander replied with a grin. This wasn't just another therapy session, it was his first competitive ride since the accident. The arena was filled with current and former patients, staff members, and families who had become part of the Harrison Center community. Victoria had organized the event as both a celebration and a demonstration of what was possible with determination and proper support. "Remember," Collins said, his weathered face beaming with pride as he helped Alexander mount, "Thunder knows this dance as well as you do. Trust him." Richard and Victoria stood together at the rail, their faces showing a mixture of pride and carefully contained concern. They had come so far from the tense, fractured family Sarah had first met, but some protective instincts never quite faded. As Alexander and Thunder began their warm-up lap, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The silent patient who could barely move had become not just a success story, but a pioneer in rehabilitation medicine. The Harrison Center's methods had revolutionized the field, proving that recovery was possible, even in cases others had deemed hopeless. "Look at that form," Dr. Chen commented, joining Sarah at the rail. "The neural pathways we thought were permanently damaged have not just healed, they've created new connections. He's actually showing better control in some areas than before the accident." The demonstration ride was meant to showcase the center's integrated therapy approach. Alexander and Thunder moved through a series of increasingly complex maneuvers, each one demonstrating the remarkable coordination between rider and horse that had been rebuilt through months of dedicated work. In the stands, a group of current patients watched with rapt attention. Among them was a young girl who had arrived at the center, unable to walk after a swimming accident. Now she sat in her wheelchair, her eyes shining with determination, as she watched Alexander guide Thunder through a precise figure 8. "That's what I want to do," Sarah overheard her whisper to her mother. "If he can do it, I can too." That was perhaps the greatest gift the center had given its patients, not just physical rehabilitation, but the restoration of hope and possibility. Every success story became inspiration for others, creating a continuous cycle of healing and growth. Victoria had found her own path to healing through her work with patients' families. Her support program had become a model for rehabilitation centers worldwide, teaching families to be active participants in their loved ones' recovery rather than helpless observers. "You know," she said softly to Sarah as they watched Alexander complete a particularly challenging sequence, "I used to think strength meant never showing weakness. Now I understand it's about having the courage to keep trying, even when things seem impossible." The demonstration reached its climax as Alexander guided Thunder through a complex dressage pattern, the same one they had been practicing the day of the accident. There was a collective held breath as horse and rider approached the final sequence. This time, however, There was no fall, no tragedy. Instead, Alexander and Thunder moved in perfect harmony, their performance a testament to the power of trust, determination, and proper support. As they came to a stop at Center Arena, the crowd erupted in applause. Richard was the first to reach them, helping his son dismount more from habit than necessity. The embrace they shared spoke volumes about how far their relationship had come, from rigid expectations and misunderstandings to genuine respect and support. "You did it, son." Richard's voice was thick with emotion. "We all did it," Alexander corrected, looking around at the gathered community. "Every person here is part of this story." Later, during the celebration reception in the garden, Sarah found Alexander sitting with a group of new patients, sharing his experience not as a success story to be admired, but as a fellow traveler on the journey of recovery. "The hardest part isn't the physical work," she overheard him say. "It's believing in possibilities when everyone else has given up. But look around. This whole place exists because someone refused to accept limitations as final." The evening air was filled with the sounds of laughter, conversation, and the gentle strains of music from the therapy group's performance. In the nearby paddock, Thunder grazed peacefully, while Max, ever the therapy dog, made his rounds among the guests, offering his special brand of encouragement. "You know what I realized today?" Alexander asked Sarah as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "This isn't just about proving the doctors wrong anymore. It's about showing everyone, patients, families, even medical professionals, that healing is possible in ways we never imagined." Sarah nodded, understanding completely. The Harrison Center had become more than a rehabilitation facility. It was a living testament to the power of belief, determination, and the right kind of support. Every person who passed through its gates carried that message forward, creating ripples of hope that reached far beyond the estate's boundaries. The autumn breeze carried the sweet scent of possibility as Sarah made her way through the Harrison Center's expanded grounds. 3 years had passed since she'd first driven through those imposing gates, and the transformation still amazed her. The once silent mansion had become a bustling hub of healing and hope, its success spawning a network of satellite centers across the globe. Today was particularly special. The center was hosting its first graduation ceremony for the International Training Program. Healthcare professionals from 20 different countries had completed their certification in the Harrison method, ready to take these revolutionary approaches back to their own communities. Alexander stood at the podium, his presence commanding yet approachable. The young man who had once been confined to a bed now traveled worldwide, speaking about rehabilitation and patient advocacy, but he always came home to the center, where every corner held memories of his own journey to recovery. "When we first developed this program," he addressed the graduating class, "we had a simple goal, to share what we'd learned about the AI's power of integrated healing. But you've taught us just as much as we've taught you. Each of you brings unique insights from your own cultures and experiences, enriching our understanding of what recovery can mean." Victoria, elegant as ever but with the warm confidence of someone who had found her true calling, presented the certificates. Her family support program had become a cornerstone of the center's approach, revolutionizing how rehabilitation facilities worldwide engaged with patients' loved ones. "Remember," she told the graduates, "every family that comes to you carries both fear and hope. Your job isn't just to treat the patient, it's to show them all what's possible." The ceremony was being streamed live to the satellite centers, where new groups of students were just beginning their training. Richard had utilized Harrison Industries' technology division to create a sophisticated network connecting all the facilities, allowing for real-time collaboration and support. "The network grows stronger every day," he told Sarah during the reception. "Each center adapts our methods to their local needs while maintaining the core principle, treating the whole person, not just the condition." In the garden, where the celebration continued, current patients mingled with the graduates, sharing their experiences and hopes. The young girl who had once watched Alexander's first competitive ride was now walking with minimal assistance, already planning her own return to sports. Dr. Chen's research team had published groundbreaking studies on the center's results, documenting recovery rates that challenged traditional medical expectations. But it was the individual stories that truly demonstrated their success. The artist painting again, the musician returning to performance, the athlete back in competition. Eleanor and Collins, now heading their own departments, had developed comprehensive training programs for support staff and animal therapy specialists. Their methods emphasized the importance of creating a healing environment that extended beyond formal therapy sessions. "You know what makes this place special?" Collins mused as he watched Thunder giving a gentle ride to a young patient. "It's not just the medical expertise or the fancy equipment. It's the belief that every person who comes through those gates has potential waiting to be unlocked." Max, now a senior therapy dog with several younger protégés, made his way through the crowd, seemingly aware of who needed his special attention most. The animal therapy program had expanded significantly, with dedicated facilities for everything from equine therapy to small animal interactions. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself back in the rose garden where so many crucial moments had unfolded. The original roses still bloomed, now surrounded by new varieties chosen for their therapeutic properties. Like the center itself, they had grown beyond their original boundaries while staying true to their essence. "Thinking deep thoughts?" Alexander asked, joining her at the garden's edge. His movement was so natural now that few would guess the journey he'd traveled. "Just remembering," she replied. "That first day when everyone thought you were lost in silence. And you heard me anyway," he finished. "You know, I've been thinking about the next phase for the center." Sarah smiled, recognizing his tone. "Another big idea. The biggest yet," he grinned. "We've proven that recovery is possible even in cases others consider hopeless. We've trained professionals to implement our methods. But what if we could reach even further? What if we could change the entire approach to rehabilitation medicine?" The sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors as they discussed his vision, a complete reimagining of how society approached healing and recovery. The Harrison Center had already changed countless lives, but Alexander saw it as just the beginning. "Every person who leaves here carries a piece of our story," he said, watching the graduates and their families enjoying the evening. "And each of them will touch hundreds more lives. It's like ripples in a pond, spreading outward endlessly." Sarah looked around at what they'd built together, not just a medical facility, but a community of hope and possibility. The silence that had once filled these halls had been replaced by the sounds of healing, learning, and growth. "You know what the best part is?" Alexander added softly. "Every success story here started the same way, with someone believing in possibilities when others saw only limitations. Just like you did with me." As the celebration continued around them, Sarah realized that their work had created something far more powerful than a rehabilitation center. They had built a place where hope was not just an emotion, but a tangible force, where healing touched not just bodies, but spirits, and where every ending was really just a new beginning. 5 years had passed since the Harrison Rehabilitation Center first opened its doors, and the changes it had sparked in the medical world were nothing short of revolutionary. On this particular morning, Sarah stood in the center's newly completed auditorium, watching as Alexander prepared to address the United Nations Global Health Summit via satellite. The auditorium was filled with medical professionals, patients, and families from around the world. The Harrison method had become internationally renowned, with success stories spanning continents and cultures. But for Sarah, the most powerful testament to their work sat in the front row, the very first group of patients who had trusted in their approach when it was still just an ambitious dream. "Distinguished delegates," Alexander began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had lived the journey he described. 5 years ago, we set out to prove that recovery knows no boundaries except those we accept. Today, I'm proud to announce that the Harrison Foundation will be partnering with the World Health Organization to establish rehabilitation centers in underserved communities worldwide. Victoria, who had orchestrated the partnership through months of careful negotiation, sat beside Richard, their hands clasped in mutual support. They had evolved from a couple bound by circumstance into true partners in both life and purpose. The family's business empire, once focused solely on profit, had been completely restructured around medical innovation and accessibility. Our approach isn't just about medical treatment, Alexander continued. It's about creating environments where healing becomes possible, where hope is sustained by community, and where every person's potential is recognized and nurtured. The presentation included live feeds from satellite centers around the globe, a clinic in rural India where traditional healing practices were being integrated with modern rehabilitation techniques, a center in Brazil where former patients had become mentors for new arrivals, a facility in Africa where mobile units brought rehabilitation services to remote villages. Dr. Chen presented the latest research data showing how the Harrison method had significantly improved recovery rates across a wide range of conditions. But it was the personal stories that truly captured the summit's attention, patients speaking in various languages about their journeys from hopelessness to recovery. During a break in the proceedings, Sarah found Alexander in the therapy gardens, where he often went to gather his thoughts. The gardens had expanded far beyond their original boundaries, now including specialized areas for different types of therapeutic activities. "Remember when all this was just an idea?" he asked, gesturing to the thriving facility around them. "When everyone except you thought I was lost in silence?" Sarah smiled, thinking of those early days. "You were never lost. You just needed someone to help find the path forward." They watched as a therapy session unfolded nearby. A young patient was working with one of their international program graduates, using techniques that combined elements from multiple healing traditions. Max's grandson, now a certified therapy dog like his predecessor, provided encouraging support. "You know what makes me proudest?" Alexander mused. "It's not the buildings or the programs or even the success rates. It's how every person who comes here leaves with not just healing, but with purpose." He was right. Former patients had gone on to become advocates, mentors, and innovators in their own right. The ripple effect of their work had touched countless lives, creating a network of hope and healing that spanned the globe. Victoria had joined forces with international humanitarian organizations, working to make rehabilitation services accessible to those who couldn't afford private care. Richard's technology division continued to develop innovative, adaptive equipment, with all patents made freely available to non-profit healthcare providers. The Harrison Foundation's scholarship program had already produced several classes of medical professionals trained in their integrated approach. These graduates were now establishing their own centers, adapting the methods to serve their local communities while maintaining the core principle of treating the whole person. "The UN partnership will change everything," Alexander said, his voice filled with quiet excitement. "We can reach places we never thought possible, help people who never had access to this kind of care before." Sarah nodded, understanding the magnitude of what they were about to undertake. "It's amazing how far we've come from those first tentative steps. Steps that you helped me take," he reminded her. "You know, I've been thinking about the future. Again." "Another big idea?" Sarah asked. Though she already knew the answer, Alexander's vision had never stopped expanding, each success leading to new possibilities. "The biggest yet," he smiled. "We've proven that recovery is possible. We've shown that integrated care works. Now it's time to change the entire global approach to rehabilitation. No more accepting limitations as final. No more giving up on patients who don't fit traditional recovery patterns." As they walked back toward the auditorium, they passed the wall of photographs that chronicled the center's journey. The images told a story of transformation, not just of patients regaining abilities, but of an entire community learning to see possibility where others saw only limitations. "Every person who comes through those gates carries a piece of our story forward," Alexander said, pausing to greet a group of new patients. "And each of them adds their own chapter to it. That's how real change happens. One person, one story, one moment of hope at a time." The afternoon session was about to begin, and the auditorium was filling with people from all walks of life, united by their commitment to making rehabilitation care accessible to all. As Sarah took her seat, she reflected on how their work had grown from a single act of believing in possibility into a global movement for change. The silence that had once filled the Harrison mansion had been transformed into a symphony of healing, hope, and possibility. And this, she realized, was just the beginning of an even greater story. 10 years had passed since Sarah Matthews first drove through the gates of the Harrison mansion, and on this bright spring morning, she stood in the same spot where her journey had begun. The imposing iron gates were still there, but now they stood permanently open, a symbol of the welcome extended to all who sought healing within. The Harrison Rehabilitation Center had grown beyond anyone's wildest dreams, its methods and philosophy, adopted by facilities around the world. But it was here, on these grounds, that the most powerful transformations had taken place, not just in the lives of patients, but in the very understanding of what healing could mean. Alexander, now a globally recognized advocate for rehabilitation medicine, was preparing to host a very special event. The center was celebrating its 10th anniversary with a gathering that would bring together patients, families, and medical professionals from around the world. "Hard to believe it's been 10 years, he said, joining Sarah on the front steps. His movement was so natural now that few would guess the journey he'd traveled. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up in that silent room." "But you never gave up," Sarah reminded him. "Even when you couldn't speak, you were fighting to break through." The celebration was being held in the gardens, which had grown into a stunning therapeutic landscape that served as a model for rehabilitation centers worldwide. Patients from every chapter of the center's history had returned to share their stories and celebrate the community that had helped them heal. Victoria, who had transformed from a distant stepmother into a passionate advocate for patient families, was greeting arrivals with genuine warmth. Her family support program had become a standard component of rehabilitation care implemented in centers across the globe. "You know what I've learned in these 10 years?" she confided to Sarah. "True healing isn't just about the patient, it's about healing relationships, communities, even our understanding of what's possible." Richard, his business acumen now fully aligned with his heart, had used the Harrison Industries' resources to make advanced rehabilitation technology accessible to those who needed it most. The company's non-profit division supplied equipment to centers in underserved communities, while their research team continued to develop innovative solutions for rehabilitation challenges. "We're not just changing lives anymore," he said, watching a demonstration of their latest adaptive technology. "We're changing the very foundation of how society approaches healing and recovery." The day's events included presentations from their satellite centers around the world. Through live video feeds, they witnessed the impact of their work in different cultures and contexts. A center in Japan incorporating traditional healing practices. A facility in Kenya using mobile units to reach remote villages. A program in Brazil where former patients mentored those just beginning their recovery journeys. Dr. Chen, whose research had helped validate their methods scientifically, presented the latest data showing the long-term success of their integrated approach. But it was the personal stories that truly captured the essence of their achievement. A young artist who had regained the use of her hands now taught art therapy to other patients. A former professional athlete who had been told he would never walk again now coached adaptive sports. Countless others who had found not just recovery, but new purpose through their experiences at the center. The Harrison Foundation's teaching program had grown into a full-fledged medical academy, training the next generation of rehabilitation specialists in their holistic approach. Graduates went on to establish their own centers, adapting the methods to their local needs while maintaining the core principle of believing in possibilities. Elena and Collins, now directors of their respective departments, had developed comprehensive training programs that were being implemented worldwide. The integration of support staff and animal therapy into the rehabilitation process had become a standard practice, recognized for its crucial role in patient recovery. As the day progressed, Sarah found herself back in the rose garden, where so many pivotal moments had occurred. The original roses still bloomed, now surrounded by new varieties chosen for their therapeutic properties. Like the center itself, they had grown beyond their initial boundaries while staying true to their essence. "You know what I realize now?" Alexander said, joining her in the garden. "Every person who comes here adds something to our story. Every success, Every breakthrough, every moment of hope becomes part of something bigger. The celebration culminated in an evening ceremony where patients from throughout the center's history shared their stories. Each narrative was unique, yet they all echoed with the same theme: the power of believing in possibilities when others saw only limitations. As twilight settled over the estate, Sarah watched the gathered community, patients, families, staff, and supporters, all united in purpose. The silence that had once filled these halls had been transformed into a symphony of healing, hope, and endless possibility. 10 years ago, Alexander addressed the crowd, his voice carrying the weight of experience and the lightness of joy. This place was defined by silence and limitations. Today it stands as a testament to what can happen when we refuse to accept those limitations as final, when we believe in the power of human potential, when we understand that healing is not just about recovering what was lost, but discovering what's possible. The evening ended with a candlelight ceremony, each flame representing a life touched by the center's work. As the light spread through the crowd, Sarah realized that their work had created something far more powerful than a rehabilitation facility. They had built a place where hope was not just an emotion, but a tangible force where healing touched, not just bodies but spirits, and where every ending was really just a new beginning. The Harrison Rehabilitation Center had become a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of belief, determination, and the right kind of support. But more than that, it had become a reminder that within every challenge lies the seed of possibility, and that with the right care, understanding, and community, those seeds could grow into something beautiful and enduring. 25 years had passed since that first transformative morning at the Harrison Mansion. The once imposing estate had evolved into an international symbol of hope and healing, its methods revolutionizing rehabilitation care worldwide. On this particular morning, Sarah Matthews stood in her office, now the Executive Director of Global Operations for the Harrison Foundation, preparing for a very special transition. Alexander Harrison, whose journey had sparked this global movement, was officially passing the leadership of the foundation to the next generation. But this wasn't a simple changing of the guard. It was a celebration of how far they'd come, and a vision of where they were headed. "Ready for the big announcement?" Alexander asked, entering her office with the same quiet confidence he'd developed over years of advocacy and leadership. His movement was fluid and natural, decades of dedication having transformed his once broken body into a testament to the power of possibility. "The real question is, are you ready to step back?" Sarah smiled, knowing how much of himself he had poured into their work. "Step back, yes. Stop? Never." His eyes twinkled with the familiar determination that had characterized their journey together. Besides, the foundation's future couldn't be in better hands. The main auditorium was filled to capacity. Representatives from their global network of rehabilitation centers joined via satellite, while the in-person audience included medical professionals, former patients, and families whose lives had been touched by their work. Victoria and Richard, now in their golden years but still actively involved in the foundation's mission, sat in the front row, their faces glowing with pride. Alexander took the podium one last time as executive director. 25 years ago, he began, this journey started with a single act of belief, a nurse who refused to accept silence as final. Today that belief has grown into a global movement, touching millions of lives. But our work is far from over. He gestured to the young woman sitting beside Sarah, Maria Chen, Dr. Chen's daughter, and herself a pioneering researcher in rehabilitation medicine. The next chapter of our story begins today. Under Dr. Maria Chen's leadership, the Harrison Foundation will continue to push the boundaries of what's possible in rehabilitation care. Maria stood, her presence carrying the same quiet determination that had characterized her mentor's leadership. As a child, she had watched her mother work alongside Alexander and Sarah to develop the protocols that would revolutionize rehabilitation medicine. Now she would lead the foundation into its next phase of innovation and growth. Our mission remains unchanged, Maria addressed the audience, to bring hope, healing, and possibility to every person who needs it, regardless of their circumstances. But our methods will continue to evolve. embracing new technologies, and understanding while maintaining the human connection that makes our approach unique. The ceremony included virtual tours of their newest initiatives, sophisticated rehabilitation centers in previously underserved regions, mobile units bringing care to remote communities, and research facilities developing the next generation of adaptive technologies. But the most powerful moments came from the personal stories shared by those whose lives had been transformed by their work. A young doctor who had once been a patient in their pediatric ward, now running her own rehabilitation center. A former athlete who had discovered a new purpose as a therapeutic riding instructor. Countless others who had found not just healing, but purpose through their connection to the Harrison community. Victoria, who had transformed the role of family support in rehabilitation care, spoke about the continuation of her programs under new leadership. Richard shared plans for the next phase of Harrison Industries' medical technology development, ensuring their innovations would remain accessible to those who needed them most. As the ceremony drew to a close, Alexander returned to the podium. 25 years ago, I was trapped in silence, written off as a lost cause. Today, I stand before you not just as a success story, but as proof that with the right support, determination, and belief in possibilities, there are no final limitations. He turned to Sarah, his eyes filled with emotion. None of this would have existed without you. You saw possibility where others saw only limitations. You heard me when I couldn't speak. And together we built something that will continue helping others long after we're gone. The audience rose in a standing ovation, their applause echoing through the auditorium and across the satellite feeds to centers around the world. But for Sarah, the most powerful moment came later, in the quiet of the rose garden where their journey had begun. You know what makes me proudest, Alexander said, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. It's not the buildings or the programs or even the millions of lives we've touched. It's knowing that what we started here will keep growing. Keep evolving, keep helping people find their way back to possibility. Sarah nodded, understanding completely. Their work had created something far more powerful than a rehabilitation center or a medical foundation. They had built a legacy of hope, a testament to the power of human potential, and a reminder that every ending was really just a new beginning. The evening air carried the scent of roses, the same roses that had witnessed Alexander's first steps toward recovery, now blooming alongside new varieties in gardens that stretched as far as the eye could see. Like the foundation itself, they had grown far beyond their original boundaries while staying true to their essence. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a single act of believing in possibility, they had created a movement that would continue touching lives for generations to come, and in the end, that was the greatest healing of all.